Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I think I originally saw the Wanting Mare. I think it was this time last year for the US release.
Mhm.
So it's quite nice to sort of revisit it and have the opportunity to speak with you.
Yeah.
But I guess before we get into that, I'm always quite intrigued to find out what inspires people to go into this industry, because it's the filmmaking business is not an easy one. So what was it that prompted you to decide that this was what you wanted to do with your career?
That's a big question. Yeah, I don't know. An evolving process. I know that from my youngest memories, I was trying to make things, whether it be drawing or writing or performing. And I think I went through different stages as a kid of very, very different interests that in my mind felt irreconcilable. Like, oh, history, and oh, I would like to try to perform Shakespeare. Like, oh, a bunch of very different things. And I thought for a time that meant I wanted to be an actor. And I think as I got into my 20s, I very quickly realized that was maybe the last thing I wanted to do. And however, all of my other, desires of painting and writing and all these other parts were more important to me than acting. And so that's kind of how a lot of this took hold, I think. I mean, I have been making films since I was probably about 15 or 16, but I would kind of leave it and then come back and leave it and come back. But it's all kind of come together, I think, over time, being like, oh, this is somehow inclusive of all the things I've really ever been interested in. So, yeah.
And I mean, the Wanting Mare, I think this is, it's been a project that's consumed you for the best part of a decade. Can you remember where that original idea came from, or is just, too much time happened now?
I don't, I can, though a lot of that original idea has been replaced by other ideas. I remember the clearest memory I have is reading Wuthering Heights and just becoming consumed with Wuthering Heights and beguiled by it, and like endlessly confused by it, but then also wanting to like re-enter it and get lost again. And it just seemed inexhaustible. And whatever that feeling was, and that sense of scale and romance and everything was felt like what I wanted to do. While at the same time, my interests, as a late teen and certainly as a child, of fantasy were sort of happening and being reappraised almost. Maybe like I would like to make these things. And all of that came together. But it changed so much over the years. It's impossible. It's like this thing that I just have carried with me. And it, depending on the year and the mood and whatever, it kind of became that, which I think, I'm always saying, I think most people's first movies are 35 of the only movies they would ever want to make. And this is definitely that. Yeah.
I mean, do you think that that's helped the piece? Because I think for me, when I was watching it, I think that the structure of the narrative is quite loose, and it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. You sort of look at all these pieces and think, well, how is this going to work? And then slowly, as the film goes on, things all slot into place, and by the end, you're left with this sort of like completed picture. Is that, do you think it's helped with you sort of adding bits and bobs to it over the years to sort of make it a fuller story?
Somewhat. I mean, it was really challenging to kind of realize that you have 35 movies that you're trying to make. I I am thankful that I don't even really feel like I'm capable of doing that again, because the ideas, all the rest of the ideas are quite different, presumably because of that and informed by that and through that. But I think at a certain point we filmed a pretty different film than I think it wound up being, and I think we filmed probably a far more traditional movie that was more accessible, maybe. But in the end, it almost was like, this is the hope of this wasn't even the content, or it's not trying to be even a puzzle to figure out. I think it's trying to be like, just let this thing happen and kind of wander through it, and what you get, you get. And I very much believe movies. I mean, I'm not writing books, and I don't think movies should be books. I'm trying to make images that somehow are talking to one another, and that was happening of me figuring out my own voice and my own sort of movies I wanted to make. So yeah, I think it's somewhat consciously loose, certainly, but it's its own weird. I just always wanted it to feel like a close dream.
Yeah, and it does definitely have that dreamlike quality. And to me again, it was like it's always transcended movies and narratives, and it was more like a piece of visual art. I mean, I guess all movies to a point are, but this one sort of really seemed to lean into that. For me, it was this gorgeous sequence of images that did sort of take you to this other headspace. And I guess that must have been, it's not often that you get to experience that with a film, so you must be quite pleased when you're hearing sort of feedback like this from people.
I mean, you've made my day instantly. I'm always, everyone's so self-conscious about the stuff they make, and I'm always like, I love the film, and I'm all of the I think the space that we all collectively pushed it to, of removing a lot of those signposts and guardrails and expositional bits that would make you be like, oh, I know what's going on. I didn't know this here. Always felt like it took away from this dream of an experience that could be a little transcendent, but strange and small. And so we went for it, and when it works for people, nothing is more exciting to me. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was, I mean, the themes and everything are very different, but it was almost like Clive Barker's Magica. Magica series, because that's all to do with sort of like magic and other worlds and stuff. And although this one isn't necessarily in that world, it sort of felt like it sort of shared some sort of weird DNA and kinship with a story like that.
Yeah, that's funny. I went through a Clive Barker phase this year, being like, I sort of, it just had missed me, and then rediscovering it and be like, wow, what an incredible, profound artist. I love anyone who has such clear fixations and fetishes and fears, and then they're just all there, and certainly Clive Barker. But yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things in the world is the Twilight Zone, and I watched the Twilight Zone over and over as a kid, and there is this sort of sealed off, you're going into the land of the strange, and strange things will happen here, and you kind of have your head dunked underwater for a time. That's always I'm always love, that I think in a way the opening shot is as much of a Rod Serling, like, where you're going to sleep now, yeah.
I mean, I think you filmed this film, over a number of years in a couple of batches. What challenges did that present, with like your actors? Did you shoot them separately, or was it a case of like, we're going to need you to come back at a later date, so please don't change too drastically?
We managed to avoid that somehow, and I mean, part of the structure of the movie allowed that, but I am sort of so reverent to these little spaces of filming that I'm sure things could have been aided if I just was like, hey, I know it's 2 years later, come back and do this thing. We weren't really able to do it, and I don't like doing that. But it was in stages, it just was challenging. It was obviously the most challenging at the beginning, because you have nothing to show anyone, and you're trying to convince them to do insane things and rearrange their life to come make a very strange movie. It gets a little bit easier as you go on, because you have more to show. But over time like that, it is fun, because you're able to reflect and tweak and move around. So it's becomes a kind of longer document emotionally, I think, for the people who are making it.
And Dune did really well last year in the box office, and that was, a more I guess quote unquote like cerebral sort of fantasy epic. You're kind of hoping that now that this is, with something like Dune has proved that there is a market there, that one, that audience will now seek out films similar to maybe your film, and that sort of opens doors for more projects, like this to get made.
I hope so. I've been talking quite a lot about Dune, and I'm a huge fan of it, and a huge fan of the novels. And I hope they just keep going and don't stop and get to the big worms. But it's great. I mean, any of that sort of stuff that is, the conversations certainly we've been having in putting together another project is, how are you in a way doing something different, but also not, but delivering the goods, and the Wanting Mare is a strange movie, and is admittedly a strange movie. And some of our interests and my interests are, how do I maintain that strangeness and do it in something that is of a scale of Dune, and people can watch and have one of those experiences that necessarily isn't, an existing piece of IP or adaptation in that sense. And an original adventure would be certainly the hope. So Dune is one can only aspire to.
And I think I read somewhere that you're quite keen to delve back into this world and to tell other stories. I mean, I guess a lot of filmmakers that have spent so much of their life would probably be wanting to to leave this world. But what is it about this that excites you so much? What other stories are you wanting to tell?
Well, I have a whole filing cabinet of them here. And most of I really love restrictions in a way. Creatively, boundaries are good things. And saying that I have one world to build out, like there's no, as long as it's all fictional, like all of the stories are not like in the city of the Wanting Mare. It's completely other places and other people and other genres. And, any wild different idea I could probably come up with, I could just make work under this umbrella. And I like that idea because it feels as though it's, I'm constantly saying I'm of the many frustrated disciplines, I'm certainly a failed painter, but I love the sense of painters having one studio and one thing, a body of work, and that's what they're there to do. And I would love to try to do that in my little made up map and just keep expanding it as much as I can. So that's the plan. Fingers crossed.
Well, I look forward to seeing what you cook up. I'm going to wish you the best of luck with the UK release, and I will quickly get a little plug in and say that if you do watch the film and you do enjoy it, there is a great making of that has been made that will blow your mind when you see the side by sides of where this film was shot and then what ended up on screen.
Thank you so much.